Coming out of a mixed orientation marriage. Welcome to the Priceless Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Priceless Podcast. As I said in the beginning, with me, two guests that you might remember from previous podcasts. It's Carol Shepherd from Scotland and Arno Steen Andreasen from Denmark. Welcome back to the Priceless Podcast, both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's nice to have you back. Today we have a totally different topic, and also we're going to do this in a different way than people are used to, because we're going to have a conversation together about our, can I say, joint experience or similar experience with being or having been in mixed orientation marriage and coming out of a mixed orientation marriage. That's why we chose this title that we have today. So can you, before we start, introduce yourselves, and then I can also introduce myself.
Okay, my name's Carol Shepherd. I'm from Scotland in the United Kingdom. I was married to a man for 24 years and I have 3 older children.
Well, my name is Arno. I live in Copenhagen. I'm 56 years old. I was married to a woman for 30 years and I have 2 adult children.
And my name is Mihael and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm 43 years old, soon 44, and I have 2 children. I was married to a woman for 12 years. On paper, I was married for almost 15 years. And today we're talking about our experience, how it was for us to be in a mixed orientation marriage, and also how it was for us to get out of the mixed orientation marriage. So maybe we can start talking about how it was for us to be in a mixed orientation marriage. As I'm gay. Maybe you can also say your sexual orientations before we start talking about this question.
I forgot to say that I'm 50. I probably forgot that on purpose. I identify as bisexual.
And I identify as gay.
So let's talk about how was this experience for us being in a mixed orientation marriage with this sexual orientation that we have, each of us.
I'm just wondering if did you know that you entered into a mixed orientation marriage, or did you find out your own sexual identity was different than you expected while you were married? Because I also wonder if our entry into the marriage makes a difference as well.
If some of the people watched my interview, I was very pious and I was hoping that I was actually bisexual and that I could make a marriage with a woman work. I knew that I was attracted to the same sex. So I think that I entered this whole marriage, mixed orientation marriage, with quite naive, I would say. I was pretty pious. I didn't have any relationships before this relationship. So my ex-wife was my first relationship and we got married. And I told her that I had same-sex attraction before we got married, about 6 months before, but I would say that we were both pretty clueless at that time and hoped for the best and that something would change. So I guess I was still in this whole Christian mindset of it's possible to change and pray the gay away, or or just hope that it won't be that strong and that I will manage to live like this in a marriage with a woman.
Yeah, I would say I had a fairly similar experience. I had actually met my husband at the age of 19 and was together with him for a few weeks, and then left him because of my same-sex feelings. I felt it wasn't the right thing to do. And then he came back into my life about 5 years later, and we did get together. And at that point, I was very involved in a vineyard fellowship, which is fairly fundamentalist. And I was told by people, he's the right one for you. God will make this work for you. And even had prophecies over us that we were going to have many children, which I now see as maybe a sort of form of control. But at the time, I thought this was, vindication that I was doing the right thing. Like yourself, Mihael, didn't have sex before marriage with anyone at all. So married at 25 as a virgin, and then got a bit of a shock, to be honest with you. But my husband knew all along about these feelings. I was always very honest with him, and there was an element of experiment. But we both, like you said, were caught up in that mindset that God will help, God will make it bearable, God will heal even. So everyone else was getting married. It was like 4 weddings and a funeral. It was 1996. Everyone around us from our church was getting married. And we were part of that group of people getting married who all hung out together.
Mm. What about you, Arno?
Well, I come from a non-Christian background, so I did have some sexual experiences before marriage, and that was with a man. So from a very young age, I did have some experiences with a man, but because of my age, it also means that my teenage years was the AIDS crisis. So I felt very much it was a curse upon my life. So I thought, well, gay means AIDS means die young. I did never expect it to be more than 25 years old. So when I become a Christian when I'm 17, I'm very much again think I want to get rid of this. So the whole thing of pray the gay away was very much again in my mindset as well, and that's what I believe that this curse will be lifted from my life, so I could live. And in that whole thing as well, also I also believe that God will change my orientation. So as I fell in love with my wife and we got married when I was 21. I actually believe that God would change things. So I did not have sex with her or anybody else before marriage, but I did have with a man before for quite a few years. So I did enter into the marriage with that. But of course, the church would often say, well, whatever you've been glued to will never leave you. And if you start in the wrong way, it'll affect you and all these different things. So to answer your question, Michael, I think that to make it work, I think we did do a really good, we did very, very well for those 30 years. And we loved each other. We love our kids, and we wanted to make it work. But of course, also for me, it became a lot of therapy, a lot of deliverance, a lot of accountability partners, anything else to try to change this thing in me. And the whole thing of if you want it enough, God will change it. But at some point, my body started to break down, and then I had to start to look at what is it I'm doing. So even though the church says I should stay and everything else, my body and my psyche did not like it anymore. No matter how much I loved my wife, my body was breaking down.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that was very much my experience too. Um, the prescriptions for antidepressants were going up year on year. And I was just exhausted I felt very suffocated that a whole large part of me wasn't being expressed. And I think that had a massive effect on my energy levels, feeling depressed. And I actually started having panic attacks, fainting in the street. I actually fainted in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. had a curious experience of pilgrims walking over me when I was on the floor. And my body gave up as well. I couldn't do it anymore. And the metaphor I use, because it describes it so perfectly as a mother of three, is that I was in labour and I couldn't shove the baby back up. There was no way of stopping this process of being honest about who I was. And it was like labour, incredibly painful. You wish it all end, but there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to go through it. And that was very much my experience. I didn't feel I had a choice in the matter. And being a parent as well, my GP saying to me, you can't do this, you're a mother. You can't be in a position where you're ready to kill yourself. You need to look after your children and yourself, but also your children. And that really, when your GP tells you to get out of a marriage, you start taking it more seriously than, sounds awful, but more seriously than religious people telling you that, because they've got a vested interest in keeping you married. So yeah, very much echo that idea of my body, my soul, my mental health, my physical health just breaking down to the point where I was falling over in the street.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing with this depression. It's actually something that is obviously something that we have in common with dealing with this kind of state of mind and struggling with coming to the point of me personally, where I was really considering of taking my life, because I really thought at that time that, it will be easier for people to actually accept my death than me being gay. And also the whole image of divorce in my country, I think I even forgot to say, for the people who don't know, that I'm from Croatia, it's still very hard within churches to get a divorce, get support or any understanding, and then stay involved within the church if you are involved in the church. And at that time I was highly involved. I was also working for a Christian organization, so that was all interconnected and making things so much harder. And it was a little bit confusing for me in the beginning. I can't remember that the first 2 years were totally, like, I didn't have any depression or any bad feelings about the fact that I got married. I was to a woman. The first 2 years were actually pretty fine. And I found that pretty confusing later, like what happened. And then the whole thing that actually throughout my marriage, me and my ex-wife, we were very good friends. We were very good partners in many ways. I would argue that we had a better marriage than many heterosexual couples, because we were talking a lot to each other, discussing things. I kind of have the experience that it was much more equal than in many hetero marriages, where there is kind of still this patriarchal mindset, where I actually would say that I invested a lot into making the two of us equal in our marriage with everything. Whatever it is, taking care of the kids, cooking, cleaning, all other things. So I was actually scared at the end when I decided to get divorced. Like, what if I'm with a partner of the same sex and after 2 years I figure out, like, this doesn't work? I don't know, how was your experience us about that, if you have any experiences or fears with, starting to think about getting out of marriage, or when you got out of marriage.
It took me 4 years to do it because he was my best friend and we were friends for a long time before we got married, and to this day I miss all the conversations we had. I miss him terribly. I feel better that he's got a partner and he's happier, but I feel I really, really miss him. But I don't think it's because he's a male. I just think we always had a brilliant, could talk our way out of a paper bag, we could talk out about anything all night, and frequently did. And that's a tremendous loss. I've forgotten the original question, but sorry. But
just talk. It doesn't matter.
It was really, really hard. And I still miss him. I miss him enormously. But I know I did the right thing. You can't sell your soul out like that, and you can't lock someone else into a relationship that is inauthentic, because there's only one life for you, for them. And I know I did the right thing, but I didn't leave him involved with someone else. I left him alone, and I was happy to be on my own. I didn't feel like I had to hook up with a same-sex partner or a trans partner straight away. I didn't leave him to be with someone else. I just needed to breathe. I felt very, very suffocated. And life was very much in colour. Once I'd made that decision, life was colour. And I didn't realise how monochrome my life was until I didn't have that burden on me anymore. So yeah, it was very, very painful, but I know I did the right thing. I don't feel guilty, but I feel very sad about it, which is a different thing.
I think that coming from the kind of evangelical charismatic wing of the church again, the whole thing of course, divorce was not something that you really wanted neither to discuss, or you wanted to almost acknowledge that it existed, and it was so important to be a good role model. I was a minister, and I was leading several churches, overseeing several churches, also in nations where you definitely do not divorce and you stay together no matter if somebody beats up the other or whatever, or you just have to stay together no matter what. So there's also for me the whole thing of how do you role model both for your own children, for the church movement I was leading, beside also how am I going to be fair to my spouse? Because again, there's no doubt that we are incredibly good friends, but also emotionally, I was consistently attracted to men and not to women. And also the whole psychological principle I definitely experienced very strongly, that you become who you are. So with age, you become who you already are. It just becomes clearer and clearer. And I think that whole thing of not being able to push it away and the feelings or anything else away, but actually became stronger, not weaker with age, quite the opposite. And so that was definitely something that was exploding, or Kel, you talked about the whole birthing process almost, and that's definitely for me as well. I was exploding, and I needed to get new way of being able to breathe. And I think for me, just like I've heard quite a few other people have described it, that even though none of us really want divorce, for many have almost felt it like a salvation experience. You suddenly feel freer, liberated, can be more yourself, get color to your life, being able to speak more about the things that's important to you, not because more because of respect, you restricted yourself during the marriage time, but the whole thing of being able to just freer express yourself or talk about things was just incredibly liberating. So I'm also sad about it, but I'm also experiencing the liberation and the freedom and the emancipation and the love of God in a way that I didn't before, because I got more and more angry with God and almost less and less believed in God. Because if God wanted marriage and if God wanted this way, why would he not do anything after 30 years of marriage? I fasted for 40 days several times. I've done all kinds of things that the church expected of me, because I wanted to make it work. So the whole thing that it didn't work, and we just have to acknowledge that either I will end up dying young, or or we would have to find a way to end it. So it was kind of those kind of paradoxes. But for me, very much the whole thing of role modeling, being fair to my ex, to my children as well, but also an awareness that I am becoming who I am, and I need to allow this process to take place.
Mm. Yeah, it's very interesting what you were saying about breathing, because I remember it so well when I actually separated and moved out of the family home and got a place of my own. I felt like, okay, this was the first time. I couldn't remember when I was able to breathe so deeply. It was really like a physical phenomenon where I felt like I could take a deep breath. And when you were talking about all the different, where your body was giving up on you, for me, it was a different experience that I actually, when I finally relaxed, I actually started to have all these different illnesses and my body started just, it was very weak. I was so sick, ended up in hospital several times, and at the end had like cancer, like a tumor on my, I don't know, saliva glands. I don't know what they're called. There is a special name. Which they say can often happen because of stress. So actually for me, it was once I accepted myself and relaxed, my body kind of just became physically pretty weak, and everything happened. I'm thinking of different ways how to engage you into supporting this podcast and maybe other projects that Intero Center does. And some people say, be more adventurous. I don't think this is such a good idea. So if you want to support this podcast, click the link in the podcast description. You can support us through a direct bank wire, or you can use Patreon and support us on a monthly basis. Yeah, so I'm interested in how did you get to the point? I mean, we are all coming from backgrounds where divorce was not a great thing to even think about. Still, we got through divorce. So how did you deal with this whole issue and get to the point where you made this decision to get divorced?
Well, for me, it was very much a situation where I felt God spoke to me. So after 29 years of marriage, I was revising my first book. I was away for 3 weeks in a place where nobody spoke English or Danish. So it's been like a hermit for 3 weeks. And in the middle of that period, I just felt God was saying to me, I'm not going to heal you because you're not broken. You've been faithful to your family and to your church. And that was the most liberating thing I've ever heard God saying, and was totally opposite to the theology that I was holding. So, it was definitely not an obvious thing that I would say, oh yes, God spoke to me and said this. It was so opposite to everything that I would expect. And I went back and started to really read up on theology and some of that again after, to try to develop discernment. Was it just my personality, or was it God, or what was it? But I got more convinced that it was God speaking to me. And I just knew that if God was not going to kind of heal me for being gay, then what I said yes to be and become in 1986, when I said yes at the altar, I would never become. And I felt that it was unfair to my wife, that I could never become that husband she also said yes to. And but I also felt that if I'm not going to be that person, I need to again become the person that I should be. But then it took a year after that in discussions and prayer and things before we then finally divorced. But for me, it was very much, I felt God was saying, you're not going to change, quite the opposite. And that made it for me a thought, if that is so, if God accepts me as who I am, then I can accept me as well. And I shall stop kind of distorting the image of God in my life.
Mm. Mm.
A lot of bad stuff happened in 2012 with me in the church, which saw me getting thrown out of church leadership. And we started talking about divorce then because of the very public thing that had happened and the disclosure of my sexuality. And I remember being on a beach in a place called Eyemouth, which is in Scotland, and it has very red pebbles on the beach. And I was with my husband and the kids walking along the beach, but I was praying silently as I was walking. And I, excuse me, picked up a pebble, quite a big one, put it in my pocket and held it as a prayer stone and just said, whatever I do, God, whether I stay or whether I go, I have to do something. And I felt that that was a prayer that was important. I knew I had to do something, whether I stayed or went, but I couldn't just swallow it back anymore. And then there was I tried to make it work. I mean, I don't think anyone could have tried harder to have made a marriage work. I desperately wanted it to work because of the kids and because I loved him, and I still love him. But everyone was advising me to stay. I talked to close friends and priests. They all advised me to stay. But I've always been quite an independent thinker. I will listen to other people, but I always make my own mind up. And my brother probably, along with my GP, I went to see my brother, who I don't see very often, but I needed to go somewhere that was far away from everyone, and he lives in Wales. And he said, "You were clearly very unhappy. I've worked with all women for the last 20, 30 years, and most of them have gone through divorce." And he said, the advice I can give you is that if it's not working, it's not working. The quicker you get out of it, the quicker you'll feel better. Just do it. And because I don't have a very deep and meaningful relationship with him normally, it was about the only really serious conversation we've had. And I just knew he was right. That what is the point in stretching this out anymore? I've given it my all. I've made myself ill. Very ill. I mean, I was 4 stone lighter than I am now, which is, I don't know, 25 kilos lighter than I am now. Very, very poorly. So really, again, it was my body breaking down. I've never really particularly cared what either my parents or the church think of me, because I'm usually at odds with both. So you kind of learn to think, never mind what they think. But I did care what my GP said. She's a very well respected, quite old GP who's a Quaker, very respected in the community. And I did care what my brother said. And once he'd said that, and I thought, yeah, he's right. I'm not going to get better. So let's just do it. And that was the process for me. Yeah. But I'm not allowed to talk about why to... my grandmother's not allowed to know why. So my grandmother to this day thinks I had an affair, which is not what I want my grandmother to think of me. But... I've been banned from telling her why, so yeah, that's hard.
And but what about yourself?
Well, I struggled, and I as I was going through a depression, and actually after my second year of marriage, I had my first depression, and I would somehow work through it and talk to my ex-wife about everything that is happening, and she knew why I'm depressed. And it was in the last year before we got divorced, I had the strongest depression and the longest depression ever. I think it was even like for a whole year. I was not doing well. It was a hard time for me to even care about the kids or anything around me. And I actually went to a conference, which is called Church and Peace conference, because I was involved a lot into nonviolence and peace work and reconciliation work here in this region. And there I met a guy, or he came out there in front of all the people. And this was actually my first contact to a gay man who was a person of faith. And I came out to him and we started to talk. And later that year, I was in Germany. He was from Germany. I mean, he still is from Germany. And I called him up and we met for a day and just walked around. And he actually asked me a very good question, something which sounds so simple to me right now. But he asked me, why am I so scared about getting a divorce? And I answered, I'm scared about all the people that I'll be hurting by getting a divorce and by coming out. And he asked me the question, how are you so sure that you're not hurting them by staying? And this was kind of the right question to ask, which made me really think and realize that I am hurting them. And then the second thing that happened is that I traveled again to the other side of the world in New Zealand, and I actually met another guy who was working for a similar Christian organization like I was. And I realized that he was gay and talked to him. And I just realized, okay, this is what I want from my life, because he was out, he was doing his work. He was not scared every day about losing his job because he's gay and out. And I said, that was actually at the time when I really started to consider to committing suicide, if that would be an answer, because it was just so hard for me to imagine to come out. And so he was actually the second person that I needed to meet, and that was, maybe it's not so much he didn't say anything to me, but it was just like seeing him living a life that I would like to have for myself, in doing the work he does and just being openly gay and not feeling afraid of losing everything and everyone. And that's what I wanted for myself, because though I was married I was living the life that was expected of me, I was constantly living in fear of what if someone finds out, what will happen. And that was not a healthy place to be at. Yeah, so that's where I actually, then when I met this other guy, I said, okay, I actually want to live. I don't want to die. I want to live. But I made that decision in New Zealand that I want to come out, and this doesn't make sense. I have to come out and go into the direction of divorce. And that's actually where I communicated to my ex-wife afterwards that I have to do it. Yeah.
So how have the two of you handled the people's reactions to your divorce?
I think just picking up on something Mihael just said, because it did resonate with me when you said about you saw these gay guys and they were happy with who they were and they were out, and that made you realize something about what you wanted. And I think there was a crunch point for me that I maybe didn't touch on earlier, but you reminded me of it. I went to a work colleague's wedding, and he was gay, and it was a same-sex wedding. And it was, the campest wedding you've ever been to. They were dressed up in white sailors' uniforms, and they'd learnt a choreographed dance. So they did this dance with these sailors' outfits on. It was so camp. And I was with a lot of people from work. It was just an office job, so they weren't people that I was particularly close to. I spent the whole time in floods of tears outside because I was so jealous that these guys were having their big gay wedding, and that's what I wanted. And that was another big turning point where I thought, that's what I want. I want a public same-sex wedding. I want to be me. So that just wanted to bring that up because I really understand that feeling of, this is what I want. And it was crystal clear, and I hadn't even been drinking, so sorry, what was the question again? I do this.
I was just wondering about then when you then decided to get divorced, how did you handle people's reactions?
To be honest, I think most people were resigned to the fact that it wasn't going to work, even though they'd been advising me to stay with it. So most people then said, okay, you've made a decision, I'll support you. They didn't say, I don't agree with you. They just supported me. But the exception to that being my mum, who was absolutely horrified. And it was very much about what will people think. It was less about me getting divorced, more about the reason why I was getting divorced. And with me, that added complication of being bisexual, there's always that reaction. Well, what's the problem if you're bisexual? Because you can be 80-20 bisexual. Very few bisexual people are equally attracted. And for me, the problem was very much that I don't have romantic feelings for men. I only have sexual feelings. Whereas with women, I have the full package. And it just didn't work. He was very, very heterosexual about, all these people that say it's a spectrum. Well, there are people at the extreme end. Totally heterosexual guy. And here's me, probably 80% female attracted. And that gap's too big to bridge. But people don't understand that. They just think, oh, you're bisexual. What's the problem? You like it both ways. So just stay in your marriage. That's the easy thing to do. But what price mental health, So there was people that were generally a little bit ignorant of bisexuality didn't understand why on earth I would do that. They said, I could understand it if you were a lesbian and you got married because that's what people did because of Section 28 in the UK, because of AIDS. But what they didn't understand was that as a bisexual woman, why did I have to do that? Because I could theoretically stay with a man. That was the main thing I got. I got that from my mother. And, it was enormously hard to explain to my husband because he felt, understandably that I'd pulled the wool over his eyes and underplayed my female attraction. But these things are fluid as well. They do change over the lifetime, and I've certainly had periods in my life where I've felt no attraction to men whatsoever, but then other periods where I've not a lot of attraction to women, and it just shifts a lot. But overall, there's a far stronger romantic and sexual and psychological attraction to women. So, I had to do what I did. And a friend said to me, you weren't put on this earth to please other people. And that really resonated with me as well. I was living my whole life to please my parents, my husband, the vicar. It was all about what other people would say. But then I suddenly looked around. I thought, none of these people are doing something completely against what they want. No one else is. Why am I doing this, So that was my, part of that process for me.
For me, I think I did a great job of taking care of other people and their opinions and their feelings. I didn't have maybe the same experience like Carol. There were people that I grew up with and who were totally ignoring me. Like when I saw them, I even went to the church like a while after to pick up my daughter from church. Something was happening, and some people that I worked with a lot and grew up with were pretending they just walked past me without saying hi or giving me their hand. So it was total like ignoring. Some people struggled, and I had a lot of understanding for all of those people, but I think I took a very poor job of really taking care of myself. That's something I'm not very proud of, because a couple of years ago, I actually came to the point where I had a breakdown with another depression and anxiety, but this time it was just like too much giving myself, listening to people, understanding them, where I came to the point of total burnout and I couldn't handle being with people. It was just too much. I was really starting to avoid people, avoid groups. I was a trainer of nonviolent communication. I completely stopped doing trainings. So that was kind of one thing that I'm not very proud of, but at the same time, I like it. I'm very proud of myself how I managed to listen to other people, especially my ex-wife, and trying to connect to what this means for her. That is something that I'm very proud and of both of us, how we actually gave our best to handle the whole situation, and also with our children and everything. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, and I would like to hear the same from you. How was your experience?
I think that for me, because when I've always been out to some, but when we came out, and it was mainly to do with the divorce, because I was then, or we were thrown out of the church within 48 hours by our co-pastors. The church that we had founded, the church that we had been fighting for 18 years and built up. So the whole thing of losing your network, losing your friends, losing your ministry, losing, for me, end up my country. I had nowhere to live after some time, so I could either live in the street in England or return to Denmark and hope some people would take me in. But that also meant saying goodbye to my daughters that were then staying in England, and I felt separated from them. So for me, the whole thing of how to handle that break as well, because it's not just my children, babies, that I was kind of in a way that I had to say goodbye to, but I also said goodbye to my ministry and what we have been fighting for so many years. So I think that I still fight sometimes the anger of how people actually treated us. For me, it was very much, I think, a little bit like you, Michael, with the whole thing of how to protect the family, and you're saying, and for me, I'd also, if the church get angry with me, that's okay, as long as they then protect my wife and my children. When co-pastors chose to throw us out of the church, they did not protect my wife. And and even though I don't think that's a reason for them to get angry with me, but sometimes you do place anger somewhere because you have to find a way to deal with it. But when they actually harmed my wife, my children, and myself in the process of religious righteousness and holiness and everything else, that I could not cope with, and that definitely became very traumatic for me. And the whole thing of how do you get rid of that anger of how people have harmed my family. One thing that harmed me, and again took my ministry away, but but they also really, really hurt my wife and my children. And I have not forgiven them for that yet, here 5 years later. Because I think it's so incredibly unfair. You know, no matter if they agree or disagree with our decision, which at the end is still our personal decision, church is a healing fellowship. It's the whole point of church. If God is love, God is healing, and that's also part of the whole crucifixion story, isn't it? That in the cross there is healing for our wounds and for our diseases and things. So when the church turns their backs to you, take your friends away from you, and actually really is hurting you like that, I think in many ways is unforgivable and is so incredibly unchristian. But I was, of course, as kind of lying down, and people were kicking me as I was lying down, and that was very difficult. And how do you then respond to different people? What do you do? So I think I often stayed quiet. I didn't do so much, but it also meant that actually anger over the years kept on building up in me, and I have needed to kind of keep on working with that whole anger of how people treated us, and and how I can move on in that. And of course, there is still the effects of it, in the sense that in Denmark as well, the different denominations are not inclusive. The state church is partly inclusive, but any other denomination is not inclusive. So, my calling, the fruit of my work, everything else is totally irrelevant. So I also every day have to work with the whole thing of how to forgive the church, no matter denomination, or Christian brothers and sisters, from still discriminating and still in reality oppressing me, and not recognizing God's call, work, fruit, and things in my life, because now the gay thing is bigger than the fruit of my life. And I think that's still, at different times, very difficult to handle. So I think to the outside world, I've handled it relatively well. But I think, again, when it comes to myself and my own journey and healing, it has definitely been a longer journey, because I have accepted in many ways that people walked all over me, and I still have to learn to forgive every day people for the discrimination that I'm facing.